she blind dates with a poor man, not knowing he was a hidden millionaire CEO in disguise. The wind was gentle that morning, rustling the golden leaves along the cobblestone streets of the old district. Nestled between a used bookstore and a vintage flower shop stood Maple & Co., a small cafe with ivy creeping up its brick facade and windows that seemed to always glow with quiet comfort. It was Amelia Rowe's favorite spot. Tucked away from the noise of city life, this cafe was where she graded essays, read poetry, and occasionally simply watched the world go by. That morning, however, she was not there for literature. She was there because her mother had insisted. Just one date, she had said. One blind date with a man described vaguely as normal, polite, quiet. Normal sounded safe, safe sounded boring, and boring sounded better than betrayal. Amelia stepped into the cafe at exactly 10. Her blonde hair was tied in a soft knot, a beige scarf draped around her neck. She scanned the room, heart half sinking at the thought of another wasted hour. Then she saw him. He was already seated near the window, a man in a worn gray coat, holding a paperback in one hand and a brown paper bag in the other. He looked up, smiled gently, and stood. "Amelia?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, and you're Cal?" "That's me," he replied. "I hope you do not mind. I got here a little early." She took the seat across from him, setting her purse down quietly. Everything about him felt unpolished. No fancy watch. His hair still slightly damp from the morning dew. His voice was calm, unhurried. "You read?" she asked, motioning to his book. "Always. Keeps me out of trouble," he said with a small smirk. She cracked a small smile but kept her guard up. Her last fiancé had also seemed charming, until he wasn't. They ordered their drinks. She, a chamomile tea. He, a black coffee, no sugar. "I like it bitter," he said. "Bitterness takes time to appreciate, like most truths in life." She raised an eyebrow. "That's oddly poetic for a blind date." Cal grinned. "Sorry. Occupational hazard." "And what exactly is your occupation?" she asked carefully, testing him. "I work with schools, in funding and support services, behind the scenes mostly." It was vague, but not evasive. She nodded slowly. Their conversation paused when he tore a piece of the scone he had ordered and leaned slightly toward the glass window. Outside, a scruffy golden retriever sat, tail wagging, eyes hopeful. Cal tapped the glass gently and held out the crumb through the cracked door. The dog took it eagerly and backed away. Amelia blinked. That was unexpected. He turned back to her and shrugged. "I pass him often. He's always hungry, never greedy." Amelia found herself smiling before she realized it. It wasn't much, really, but it was honest, unfiltered. For the first time in a long while, she felt unguarded. "Most men I've met," she said slowly, "usually start by asking if I plan to switch to a private school where I'll earn more." Cal looked puzzled. "Why would I ask that?" She looked down at her cup, swirling the tea slowly. He leaned in slightly, his voice still quiet but somehow grounding. "You like what you do, right?" "Yes." "Then the money doesn't matter." Her eyes flicked up to meet his. No one had ever said it like that. She thought about the man she had almost married, sharply dressed, endlessly ambitious, and full of empty reassurances. Cal, by contrast, looked like he had not bought a new coat in years, and yet here he was, speaking truths she had waited years to hear. He never once asked about her ex, or why she wore no ring, or why her smile came slowly, like it had to pass through several doors before reaching her lips. Instead, he just listened, and spoke only when he had something real to say. She finished her tea, he his coffee. Outside, the golden retriever curled up near the bench, licking the last crumb from its nose. When they stood to leave, Cal said nothing dramatic. "No, I'll call you, no push for a second date, just a simple, 'It was really nice meeting you, Amelia. I hope your day is gentle.'" And somehow, that felt enough. As she walked back toward her car, Amelia found herself thinking, at least he didn't quote Rumi or steal lines off Tinder profiles. Then she laughed, a real laugh, the kind that felt like her own voice again. Maybe, just maybe, Safe was not boring. Maybe safe was the beginning of something honest. In the weeks that followed their first meeting, Amelia found herself visiting Maple & Co. more often, sometimes to grade essays, sometimes to read, mostly to breathe. It surprised her how often Cal appeared there too, always alone, always with a book, sometimes writing in a worn leather notebook, sometimes just watching the world move by the window. The first few coincidences passed without comment, but by the fifth or sixth, Amelia began to wonder if the universe had a sense of humor, or if perhaps he was gently giving her the space to come closer. She never asked, and neither did he. But one rainy Tuesday afternoon, as she set her papers out across the window table and ordered her usual, she turned to the barista and said with a smile, "If he comes by today, let me cover his coffee." The barista raised an eyebrow. "You mean the guy with the book and the coat that looks like it's been through 100 winters?" "That's the one." "Anything special written on the cup?" Amelia paused, thinking. Then she said softly, "No, just tell him. It's on someone who appreciates quiet company." She never admitted it out loud, but something about Cal's presence calmed her in ways she didn't understand yet. He never flirted, never pushed, never asked for more than what she was ready to give. And that, strangely, made her want to give more. One afternoon, as gray clouds rolled across the sky and the streets began to glisten, Amelia stood outside the cafe waiting for the bus. Her umbrella had broken earlier, and she was quietly regretting not canceling a staff meeting that had run late. A familiar voice behind her said, "You look like you could use a small miracle." She turned. Cal stood there, holding an umbrella, already dripping wet from the walk. He handed it to her. "Take it. I'll survive." Before she could argue, he stepped back into the rain with a grin and walked away, soaked but smiling like it meant nothing. It wasn't grand, it wasn't romantic in the conventional sense, but something about it made her heart tighten. A few days later, her mother mentioned the backyard fence had a loose panel. Amelia had nodded distractedly, not thinking much of it. The next evening, as she came home from school, she found the panel reinforced with new screws, freshly aligned. A small note rested in the mailbox. Loose screws tightened. Fence should be good for another year. See, he didn't mention it. Not once, even when she asked if he had been near their house recently. He just smiled. "I go where I'm needed. Occasionally." The school where Amelia taught was running a book donation drive for underprivileged students. She hesitated for days before mentioning it to Cal. Not because she didn't want him there, but because part of her was afraid he might say no. He didn't. He showed up that Saturday in jeans and a faded flannel shirt, carrying a cardboard box full of gently used books. She watched from a distance as he quietly organized, carried, sorted, and even helped a shy student pick out their first novel. When another volunteer asked him what he did for a living, Cal smiled and said, "I'm in education, just not the flashy kind." That afternoon, as Amelia packed away the last few donated books, a fellow teacher leaned over and whispered, "So, who is that guy?" "Who?" "The one who follows you around like a well-behaved shadow and fixes fences in his spare time." Amelia laughed under her breath. "He's just someone who keeps showing up." Her colleague tilted her head. "You don't look like you want him to stop." Amelia didn't reply, because she didn't. Not really. Later that night, curled up with Buster on the couch and a mug of tea warming her palms, she found herself thinking about the little things. Umbrellas, fence screws, book boxes, things that didn't scream love, but whispered something just as powerful. Not a single grand gesture, no fireworks, but a steady presence. And maybe that was the kind of love that stayed. She didn't know what Cal wanted from her, but for the first time in a long while, she stopped wondering if she was enough. Because for whatever reason, he kept showing up, and part of her had started waiting for it. The day Amelia called in sick was the first time she had heard Cal's voice over the phone, not just at the cafe, not in passing, but calling, just to check. "You okay?" he had asked, his tone calm and warm. "You sounded not quite like yourself yesterday." "I'll be fine," she replied, hoarse from the fever. "It's just a cold. I'll sleep it off." He didn't say much after that. Just, "Get some rest," and hung up. She thought that was it. But half an hour later, the doorbell rang. Amelia opened the door to find a familiar figure standing awkwardly on her porch. Cal held a small thermos in one hand and a plastic bag in the other. "Chicken porridge," he said simply, holding it up. "Not the best looking, but my mom used to swear by it." Her hair was a mess, her cheeks flushed from fever, and her voice was nearly gone, but he made no comment on any of it. He just asked, "May I come in? Just for a moment?" She hesitated, but nodded. Inside, he set the food on the kitchen counter and poured it gently into a bowl. She sat quietly on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching him move around like he'd done this before, like he'd cared for someone before. He brought the bowl over and set it in her lap. "I'll be outside," he said, nodding toward the porch. "I'll wait there. Eat slowly." Before he turned to go, he gently reached to check her forehead. His hand moved toward hers, hesitant. Their fingers brushed. Amelia instinctively pulled her hand back, startled. "Sorry," she whispered, immediately embarrassed. Cal just smiled softly. "No worries. I'll be outside." And true to his word, he left her alone. Later, when the bowl was empty and her head felt slightly clearer, Amelia shuffled toward the door and peeked outside. Cal was still there, sitting on the porch bench, Buster at his feet, the leash wrapped loosely around his hand. He was nodding off, his head tilting slightly every now and then before catching himself. She went back into the kitchen, made a small cup of ginger tea, and returned with it in her hands. Opening the door slowly so it wouldn't creak, she stepped out and held the cup toward him. "I don't know how to say thank you," she said softly, "so I thought, maybe this would do for now." He opened his eyes surprised, then nodded. "Perfect." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the warmth of the tea curling into the air between them. When Amelia went back inside, her mother was resting in her room. She checked on her, tucked the blanket in tighter, then returned to her own room. She sat on the edge of the bed, reached for her phone and hesitated. There, in the depths of her gallery, was a picture she hadn't looked at in almost a year. Her in a white dress, him in a tuxedo, her ex-fiancé. The photo was saved, not because she couldn't let go, but because she hadn't dared to. Until now, with a quiet breath, she selected it. Her finger hovered for a second, then tapped, delete. She didn't even watch it disappear. Just set the phone down and looked out her window toward the porch, where Cal had once again gone still, the empty cup of tea resting by his side, Buster now curled up on his lap. That night, Amelia didn't fall asleep thinking of the man she used to love. She fell asleep thinking of the man who didn't try to replace the silence in her life, but sat beside it until she was ready to speak. Amelia had asked Cal a dozen times about his job, not because she was curious about money, Lord knows she had walked far enough from that world, but because she wanted to understand the man who kept showing up in her life in quiet, thoughtful ways. Each time Cal gave the same vague answer. "I work with a foundation that supports schools, mostly admin stuff, nothing glamorous." And every time, Amelia would smile and let it go. She had learned, the hard way, that real trust wasn't about demanding answers, it was about waiting until they were freely given. One Saturday morning, they decided to walk to a local weekend market not far from the school where Amelia taught. It was one of those golden fall days, leaves fluttering gently, the smell of roasted chestnuts in the air. As they passed a bookstore, Amelia saw one of her students, Liam, a sweet but shy 7th grader, struggling to carry his worn backpack. One of the straps had completely snapped. He gave her a timid wave and walked quickly ahead, trying not to seem embarrassed. Cal noticed too, but didn't say a word. Later that afternoon, while Amelia stayed at the market browsing second-hand poetry books, Cal excused himself. "Back in 10, he said. Monday came. During lunch break, the school principal walked into the staff lounge with a curious look. "Someone dropped this off early this morning," she said, holding up a brand new backpack. No note, just had Liam's name on the tag. Liam's face turned red as he opened it. Inside was a simple card. "For someone who carries more than just books." No signature, no logo. That afternoon, Amelia found a thank you note taped to the teacher's lounge bulletin board. It was in Liam's careful handwriting. "To the kind stranger, thank you for the backpack. I don't know who you are, but it made me feel like maybe someone sees me. I won't forget it. Liam." She didn't need to ask who had left it. Walking home that evening, Amelia tucked her hands into her coat pockets, thinking about Cal. All this time, he had never tried to impress her. He never talked about himself, never bragged, never flaunted anything. She realized that every small kindness he gave wasn't for credit. It was simply who he was, and for the first time, a question floated quietly into her mind. If he weren't anyone at all, if he had no title, no job, no story, would I still feel like he's the most extraordinary person I've ever met? The answer formed in her chest before her brain could catch up. Yes. That weekend, they sat on a park bench with cups of takeout coffee between them. Cal watched a squirrel try to steal a bag of chips from a distracted kid, and they both laughed softly. "You don't talk much about yourself," Amelia said gently. "I figure the more I talk," he said, glancing at her, "the more I might say something I'll regret." She tilted her head. "That sounds like someone who's been hurt." He nodded slowly. "Haven't we all?" She didn't press further. Instead, she sipped her coffee, then said, almost like she didn't mean to out loud, "If I ever decided to believe in love again, it'd have to be with someone like you." He turned toward her, surprised. She didn't look at him, just smiled faintly and added, "Someone who doesn't need to be anyone, to already be everything." For the first time in years, Amelia wasn't measuring love by grand gestures or lofty promises. She was measuring it by the silence between words, by the trust given without demand, by a backpack left in a principal's office, with no name attached, but somehow, all the meaning in the world. One chilly Thursday evening, Amelia sank into her couch with a steaming cup of tea, and Buster curled at her feet. The TV played in the background, the volume low. She wasn't really paying attention, just background noise for grading essays, until a familiar voice cut through. She looked up. There, standing confidently at a podium during a live broadcast, was Cal. He wore a dark suit and spoke with calm authority about educational equity. Behind him, the banner read, "National Forum for Rural Education Development. We believe every child, no matter their zip code, deserves a library with real books and real hope," he said. The camera cut to the moment he signed a pledge, $20 million in funding for public library expansion in underserved areas. The graphic at the bottom of the screen read, "Cal Bennett, CEO, Bennett Foundation." Her tea cooled in her hands. Her thoughts went numb. Cal, CEO. A man who had once told her, "I work in school support." A man who had fixed her mother's fence, brought her ginger tea, handed out backpacks anonymously. A man who had never once let slip who he truly was. She turned off the TV and just sat there, breathing in silence. The next morning at school, one of her students, Emily, came bouncing up to her desk during free period. "Miss Rowe, I got it. I got the scholarship." Amelia blinked. "Scholarship?" "Yeah," Emily beamed. "The Bennett Foundation one. Full ride, books, everything. I didn't even apply. It just showed up with a note. Said someone believed in me." Amelia felt her stomach drop. She pulled the letter from Emily's hands gently and scanned it. There was no name, no signature, just that same phrase, "Someone believes in you." The puzzle clicked into place with a sudden heavy thud. The anonymous backpacks, the quiet donations, the vague job, the aversion to being asked about money or work. She had been looking straight at the truth, but never seeing it. And now it was too late. She walked home that evening without texting Cal. She let the silence stretch like an ache. He had lied, not with his words, but with his silence. He hadn't trusted her with the truth, and that hurt more than anything. She didn't cry. Not that night. She just sat at her kitchen table long after Buster had fallen asleep at her feet, staring at nothing, her hands wrapped around an untouched cup of coffee. He didn't think she was strong enough to know. And for someone who had once been left at the altar by a man whose secrets came dressed in tuxedos and expensive dinners, the hurt of being left out of the truth, again, was too much. The next day, she deleted Cal's number. He hadn't told her who he was, not because he was afraid of what might change, but because he didn't believe she could love him for the right reasons. Not trusting her, was the most painful betrayal of all. The package arrived on a gray Friday morning, plain brown paper tied with simple twine. There was no return address, just her name, Amelia Rowe, written in familiar handwriting that made her heart ache. She left it on the hallway table. For hours, she swept the kitchen, folded laundry, walked Buster twice, anything to delay opening it. But as dusk settled over the windows and the house grew quiet again, the stillness pressed in. She finally untied the string with trembling fingers. Inside was a book, Letters to a Young Poet. Her copy, the one she had given Cal when they talked about poetry under the maple tree outside the coffee shop. The one she had scrawled a note inside. For when the world feels too loud. Her breath caught. Tucked inside was a folded piece of lined paper. A letter, written in pen, in Cal's unmistakably neat, steady handwriting. She hesitated. Then she read, "Dear Amelia, I have started this letter a dozen times, torn it up, started again. Words have never failed me, until now. You once told me that silence can be kinder than explanation, but sometimes silence is just fear, dressed up to look polite. And I was afraid. I wasn't afraid of what you'd think of me being a CEO. I was afraid that if you knew, everything good between us would start to feel bought. And after what I went through, I didn't know how to believe in love that didn't come with conditions. When I was 27, I lost everything. Not just the company, my home, my peace. The woman I was going to marry walked away the day the bank froze our accounts. She didn't even look back. That day, I promised myself, if I ever tried to love again, it would be as me. Not the title, not the suits, just Cal. Then I met you. You and your tea-stained lesson plans, your love for broken-spined books, your stubborn loyalty to things that still matter, truth, kindness, simple mornings. You were never loud, but you were always clear. And you made me want to be clear too. I never meant to lie. I only wanted to be seen before being recognized. You once gave me this book and said, "For when the world feels too loud." You didn't know you were also handing me a piece of your heart. Now I give it back. And if you never want to see me again, I'll understand. But if there's even a small part of you that still wonders what it could be like, I'll be sitting where we first met, Saturday, 10 a.m. No suits, no titles, just me. Because all I ever wanted was to be loved when I had nothing. Cal. By the end, the ink blurred beneath Amelia's tears. She pressed the book to her chest, held it there for a long time. Then, without even changing her sweater, she put on her coat, called Buster to the door, and walked out, toward Maple & Co. Toward the place where something soft and slow and true had started. At exactly 10:01 a.m. on Saturday morning, the small bell above the door of Maple & Co. jingled softly. Amelia had been sitting there since 9:45, hands wrapped around a mug of warm tea, trying not to look at the door every time it opened. She told herself she just needed closure, that if he didn't come, she would move on, that she could. But when she heard the familiar sound of the bell and saw the shape of a man stepping in out of the cold, everything in her heart caught in her throat. He was wearing the same worn gray coat from the first day they met, and in his hand, a paper bag, crinkled and slightly wet from the mist outside. She could already guess what was inside. Buster's favorite biscuits. Cal stood by the door for a moment, looking around the coffee shop like it was the first time he had ever seen it, like he needed to be sure it hadn't changed. And then he saw her. Their eyes met. He didn't smile right away. Neither did she. Instead, there was a silence between them, heavy with everything they hadn't said, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only existed between people who had shared something real and fragile and unfinished. He took a slow step forward, then another. When he reached her table, he didn't sit. He simply stood across from her, eyes steady, hands slightly nervous at his sides. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. His voice was softer than usual. "And I've said less than I should have, and maybe too much in writing. But if you still need someone who shows up, someone who doesn't ask questions you're not ready to answer, I'm still here." He set the bag of dog biscuits on the table without looking down. Amelia stared at it for a moment. Then she looked up, her eyes meeting his fully. She didn't ask why he lied. She didn't ask what kind of CEO wore old boots and carried books around like armor. She didn't ask how much of what he had shown her was real, because she already knew. And because some things, if they're honest enough, don't need to be explained. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, unsure whether to sit or leave, unsure if she was thanking him for the biscuits, or the letter, or just for being there. Then she added, with the smallest hint of a smile tugging at her lips, "You don't have to say anything else." Relief flickered across his face. "But," she continued gently, "you can't disappear again." He laughed, just once, short and full of something close to joy. "That's fair." She gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Then sit. You owe me a conversation about why The Catcher in the Rye is overrated." Cal pulled the chair out slowly and sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "Only if you agree to defend Jane Eyre with your full literary passion." She raised an eyebrow. "Always." And there it was, the easy rhythm, the comfort of someone who knew how to be quiet and still say everything, the familiar warmth that had crept in slowly until it felt like home. Outside the window, Buster sat patiently beside the table, tail wagging gently, as if he, too, had been waiting for this. And inside, two people who had both once sworn off love sat side by side again. No labels, no promises, no perfect endings, just a second chance, offered without condition. 1 year later, the house was quiet, except for the soft clink of 2 mugs being set down on a wooden porch table. The early morning sun spilled golden light over the porch of a small white house tucked near the edge of a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant. There were no fountains, no security gates, no marble columns, but there was a garden Amelia had planted with her mother, wildflowers blooming freely. There was a wooden fence Cal had built himself, and a small swing under a tree that groaned gently in the breeze. And there was laughter. Every morning, without fail, Cal and Amelia sat on that porch with their coffee. No phones, no noise, just 2 mugs, 2 books, usually half-read and traded mid-sip, and the sound of children's voices carrying from the elementary school across the street. The school had only been open for 6 months, built on a piece of land funded entirely by the Bennett Foundation. No one in the neighborhood knew that the man who quietly helped the kids cross the street in the mornings was the man whose name was etched on the cornerstone of the library building. Cal liked it that way. He wore flannel shirts now, sometimes didn't shave for a few days. He planted tomatoes, burned his toast, and once accidentally painted over a light switch. Amelia teased him constantly, and loved him more every day. Inside the house, Amelia's mother was folding laundry by the open window, her health fully restored. Buster barked playfully in the yard, chasing a butterfly as if he were still a puppy, not the 9-year-old dog with silver whiskers and a wise gaze. The living room was filled with sunlight, and soft jazz played from a record player they found at a thrift store during a weekend date. Amelia's office was now by the front window, where she graded essays and wrote in her journal. On her desk, framed in warm oak, was the first letter Cal ever wrote her, creased from rereading, words a little faded, but no less powerful. Beside it, a photo. The 2 of them at the school's first book drive, both smiling in that way people do when they know they are exactly where they belong. In looping handwriting below the framed letter were the words Cal had written by hand. "She loved me when I had nothing, so now I give her everything, starting with my heart." It was the only decoration she ever truly cared to show off. One morning, as birdsong threaded softly through the yard, Amelia folded the newspaper over and looked across the table at Cal. "Another student just got the scholarship. That's the 3rd this month." Cal smiled behind his mug. "Good. You're never going to let them put your name on the program, are you?" He shook his head, eyes warm. "I don't need the world to know. Just you." She reached across and touched his hand. "I do." He lifted her fingers, kissed the back of her hand, and whispered, "Then, that's enough." The screen door creaked open behind them. Her mother stepped out with a tray of fresh scones. Buster barked once, proudly dragging a stick across the yard like he had just saved the world. Cal stood to help her mom with the tray, careful as always. Life didn't look like the dream Amelia once had. It looked better, because now it wasn't filled with empty promises and rehearsed perfection. It was filled with mismatched mugs, quiet mornings, shared books, and love that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. And somewhere in that peaceful corner of the world, two people who had once been broken, by betrayal, by fear, by loss, had quietly, gently found their way back to something whole. Not flashy, not loud, just honest, and deeply, wonderfully theirs. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, if it reminded you that love doesn't have to be loud to be real, and that sometimes the most powerful kind of love is the one that chooses to stay quietly through everything, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that hype button to support soul-stirring stories. We bring you more than just stories. We bring you healing, warmth, and a reminder that goodness still exists in the quiet corners of the world. Until next time, take care of your heart, and let stories take care of your soul.